Hey everybody, it's Mikey here. Nice to see everybody again. If you haven't seen any of my previous videos, my name is Mikey, like I said. I am an amputee, so I have, as you may have seen when I was hopping over here, I've had one leg my entire life. And I spent the last two videos that I did on here basically just kind of summarizing a little bit of what my life has been like with one leg. Now, I of course didn't go into extreme detail in those two videos, but I definitely touched upon enough just to get the audience to know me a little bit and so I can blabber into the void about my life a little bit. So I was thinking about what I wanted to do for the third actual video that I was going to put on YouTube. And I wanted to take this in a slightly different direction because, as I mentioned in my first video, which by the way, thank you to those of you that have sent messages of support and just good vibes in general. I appreciate that. But like I said in that video, I'm not sure exactly where I want to take this channel long term. I think I'm looking at this as somewhat of a video diary of sorts, almost a way for me to gather my thoughts, because I have come to learn the hard way that talking into the void is not as easy as it sounds. It can be very difficult to stay on topic. But the topic that I wanted to talk about today is still going to be very general, so please bear with me if I either jump around a lot, or if I don't spend a lot of time on one topic, or if I start talking about one thing and then I kind of go off into a different direction. I did put time into putting notes together. I do have an outline, but it just doesn't always come across the way that I intend it to. So this is something very important to me. And for those people that know me personally, or even just know me in and out, might know that something about me that I'm really big on is, and I know this is going to be very broad and very general, and that's the purpose of this video, but it's just my overall physical health. And what I want to talk about today is my journey, my personal health journey, and the challenges that I've faced and some of the obstacles that I've overcome. Again, on a very superficial level. I think that with talking about my whole life can be really difficult in detail. So kind of like my first video, how it was spent mostly on talking about the general kind of from beginning to end, but what life is like with one leg. This is going to be kind of connected to that loosely, because the theme of this, while not directly related to my leg, will connect to it in many ways, because obviously it's a big part of my life. Obviously it's tied to my physical health and well-being, and obviously there will be challenges associated with it. But I kind of want to talk about health in general. So it's not just going to be about my health in relation to that, but it's going to be my relationship with food. It's going to be my relationship with exercise, working out, and body image, and just general feeling of well-being. So there's a lot of little themes that are going to tie in here. I don't know exactly who I'm talking to directly. And this is, again, more for myself as like a video diary. So rather than focusing on one topic and kind of reaching for a specific audience, I just really kind of want to see this as an opportunity to talk about my own experience. And with that being said, I do want to put this out there. There will be certain topics I might touch upon that might relate to some topics that could be a little bit tricky. So I guess my general disclaimer is, you know, like we all should be doing, is anything that has to do with our, bodily health, with our mental, emotional, physical well-being, you should always get information. We should always get our information from vetted sources. We should be seeking help whenever possible from professionals, whether they be in medicine or in nutrition, or all of the above. So anything that I might say is just a reflection of my own experience and is by no means educational in any way beyond just talking about my own life. So anything I say, if there's anything that just rubs anyone the wrong way, or it doesn't match with your experience, or if you think that you want to take something from what I say and kind of apply it to your own life, again, just always go to active, credentialed professionals when it comes to anything related to your life, your diet, your well-being, your exercise routine, etc. This is just going to be a talk about my own life. So hopefully I conveyed my message there without rambling too much. So I want to talk about just my life. So I'm going to start very early and I'm gonna just kind of progress later in life and where I am now, because just to tie up what I was saying a few moments ago about people that know me well know that I'm, really big and really passionate about like healthy eating and exercise, and that can take many different forms. And I'm no expert. Again, I'm not, my area of expertise is not anywhere in that area, even though it's something that I'm very interested in. It's not something that I'm a professional in. So I just want to make sure I put that out there. My professional, life has nothing to do with those realms. So I just want to make sure I make that clear. Even though I ingest a lot of content online related to health, fitness, nutrition, it's something that I really am interested in. And I do know a lot with the skeptical, disclaimer that, everything that I take in, I try not to be dogmatic about it. And I think that, we're talking about areas of science. So all of this has a science behind it, and nothing is clear cut. And so I think I'm, at this point, I think I'm beating a dead horse. So I'll just kind of move on. I want to talk about my own life and my own health journey and my own fitness journey. So as a kid, like many of us, and especially those of us who are, lucky enough to have lived in the West, specifically I'm in the United States. And so I am obviously, fortunate enough to have grown up with, the ability to have never suffered from any sort of like food insecurity or the fear of going hungry. I've always been very fortunate. And as a not so positive result of that, even though in general that's a very positive thing overall in life, and I'm very grateful for it, it can result to a weird relationship with food, at least in my sense. I've always been a big eater. And that's probably not any different from many other people across many different, walks of life. But from the earliest time I can remember, food was always a big part of my life. Maybe not bigger than other people, maybe more. I don't know. I only know my own experience. But it's funny how I wrote down notes here about like what some of my favorite foods were, growing up, and whether it was, ribs with sweet barbecue sauce. I was able to hound down like a full rack of ribs as a kid, no big deal. Like just sweetest, just meatiest ribs that you can do. I still love ribs. I just, nowadays wouldn't go so heavy on the sweet barbecue sauce. Ice cream was a big one for me. All the 90s, all the candy that you could think of, that was big, not just in the 90s, but I just mean like that was such a commercialized era, growing up with like Nickelodeon and the commercials, and anyone who kind of grew up, I think in the 80s, especially 90s, and, obviously in the decades since then, it's always been marketed to us. By the way, I say a lot, and I'm trying to stop that. So if anyone catches my verbal tick, I'm working on it. It's hard for me not to say, I'm aware of it. I'll try to work on it. Candy, chips, snack foods. I mean, so many of us, I think, have a history with these as part, like friends. They were like friends to us, at least to me. I shouldn't say us, but to me, whether they were Lay's barbecue chips, like Go-Gurts, Otter Pops, those orange Dreamsicles and Fudgesicles, those were like the best friend whenever I needed comfort, I feel like. When it came to fast food, I legitimately remember the feeling, almost like a DRUG, kind of thing, is I felt like I had to go all out. It was almost like an all or nothing. Like I really felt that rush and that just addict, like just ravaging feeling of having to consume as much as possible into the most extreme version as possible. And whether this meant, like, I remember if I went to like McDonald's, I couldn't just get a meal. Like I would get anxiety if I didn't make sure to, convey to, the adults in my life even, like, hey, I need to get the supersize large meal, and I need to get the McFlurry with it. If I was at Jack in the Box, I had to get that extra large curly fry. I had to get the biggest burger. I had to get the strawberry banana milkshake. I mean, it was just this urge. Like I felt like if I didn't get the most of it, that I was missing out. And it was almost like this pure, just this most raw sense of indulgence that I can possibly describe it as. Wendy's, I had to get the extra large Frosty and the burger and the fry. If any element there was missing, I felt like anxiety. So hopefully you get the point about that. I'm not going to continue naming popular brands that we're all very aware of. Interestingly enough, though, I had a very similar obsession with what we would consider whole foods. So, non-processed foods, whether they, so for me, I was obsessed with just eating whole water. I could eat to this day, I don't restrict myself when it comes to any whole foods. Like if I'm craving fruit, I'm going to eat fruit. Come on. But I remember eating a whole watermelon in one sitting. Literally. I was obsessed with grapes. All fruits basically were my thing. Mangoes. I've always been obsessed with that. So it's not that I just had a relationship with bad food. It's just that the bad food, it definitely had this all or nothing mentality. Whereas with the more whole natural foods, quote unquote, that weren't processed basically. So non-processed foods, was still a big part of my life, and I was a big eater in general. Meats, so whole healthy meats, I know people have different opinions about eating meat. I do eat meat to this day. I still do. I went through, I'll talk later about periods of weird dietary changes that I've gone through. That's not something I'm willing to it's not something I'm here to necessarily debate with anybody. I don't really care what anyone chooses as far as their own personal dietary restrictions. I've just kind of learned that for me personally, cutting out whole groups is not necessarily something that has worked for me. It just kind of has led to more behaviors. For me, it's more about, as I'll talk about later, and I'll get back on track, it's more about learning to cut out the processed stuff, the fried foods, the added sugary snack foods, those things that you have to actually, they have to go through manufacturing, if that makes sense, in order to produce them. I feel like when those things are cut out, all that's left are just whole foods. You've got basically every group represented. It's just you're getting the food for what it is in its entirety, in a sense. But going back to my early life, and I remember being in middle school, and I will say, I was never a very large child. I was a little bit thick, and I'll talk about later, once I reached middle school, it started showing, the thickness started showing, the feelings of feeling tired and sluggish started setting in, and the difficulties associated with wearing a prosthetic started setting in. But I was an active kid. Despite my challenges, I was a huge on the trampoline, like I talked about, in my first video. I was a huge biker. I can bike with one leg. I just need to have the strap on the left foot to hold it in. I was big on the scooters. I could ride a scooter just like anyone else could with my leg. One leg on, one leg doing the the pushing, so to say, on the scooter. So yeah, there's a lot I can do and a lot that I've always done. And so I was always very active. Middle school, that started to slow down. I think I became more sedentary. It was more video games, kind of hiding away from other kids, I think, because I remember being very young and it was very easy just to knock on the neighbor's door. Hey, can blah blah play? Vice coming to my house. Hey, can blah blah play? Those were the days where I think we were moving so much. But once I got into middle school, and again, first world problems, right? I'm playing video games. By the time I got to middle school, this is early 2000s, and so we now had a personal computer at my house. We didn't really have that in the 90s. Our family didn't really have a personal computer until around 2000. So I was sedentary a lot. Being of that generation, I was always on it. Whether it was playing a video game or exploring everything about the Windows operating system and learning how to browse the internet and everything. It's easy to see where we get our fascination with technology. It's a part of our life. But I remember being in middle school and those habits stayed the same. And because I had more agency in life, and what I mean by that is I'm given, money, like a certain amount of money to spend at school. For me, it was the extra large chocolate chip cookie that they sold us, which is just bizarre. That was the snack option that was provided to growing children. I have opinions about that. I definitely have opinions on, as a former educator, I have opinions about that. And chocolate chip milk, or chocolate milk, I mean. So that's what I would get like every day. It was like, I remember it was $1.50. I remember that because the cookie was $1. Well, I might be getting this mixed up, but I remember it was $1.50 for both. I don't remember if the cookie was $1, the milk was 50 cents, but it was something like that. I just remember every day it was like $1.50 was the cookie and the chocolate milk, and that was my snack every single day. So just refined carbohydrates and sugar, and of course some milk. So I'm getting some protein in there, and that's it. Other than that, it's just sugar, sugar, sugar all day long. And in high school, I remember it getting worse. So 8th grade, I definitely was tubbier. Like I could see it. I mean, even to this day, I think I have like some, I don't know, like how to explain it. Just, I was thick. I had thickness. And some of that worked to my benefit. Well, I shouldn't say the junk food did it all, but because I was active, I have a very thick right thigh. I have very big leg muscles on my one leg that I have. And I especially, even as a kid, it was very noticeable. I had a very thick leg that compensated for not having two. And that was due to all the activity that I did. But in 9th grade, I mean, I've always been a big swimmer. So if you've seen any of the little clips that I've posted, I'm a big swimmer. I'm still kind of getting over a shoulder issue. It sucks. It absolutely sucks. It kind of put me out. My last shoulder dislocation this year put me out of lap swimming for 2 months. And then now, and I'm just stiffer. Like, so even though I'm back into it, it's just every stroke, my shoulder is just tight. And so it doesn't have the same, I'm working on opening up the flexibility, and I've got 2 pins in my shoulder from like 2010. So it's just going to be a lifelong thing. Coffee. High school. So going back to swimming, 9th grade, I got into aquatics, and I was really lucky to do that, by the way, because in 9th grade, we were supposed to take the mandatory 9th grade PE, and then in 10th grade, you get to choose, a physical education, and then that was the only required just 2 years of PE that we had to do in high school. I don't know if that was universal, but it was just unique to my state and or district. So because of my disability, excuse me, I was provided the choice, and I don't remember if this was something my family advocated for, or if it was offered to me, I don't know. But I was offered the choice of what would ordinarily not be available for 9th grade students. So I was offered recreation, like I think it was they called it rec life. I didn't do that. That was like golf, tennis, those kind of sports. I was offered, there were a few other fitness classes, but there was swimming. And I've always been a great swimmer, even when I was a young child. That's another reason I was able to eat as much as I was and it not affect me as much. And I just remember like my mom was always great with like taking me to the pool. Like that was something I learned early on, and I've always been a good swimmer just naturally, but I also was taught to do strokes, not in a formal setting, but just by people in my life. So I was always a good swimmer. So that was a natural for me. So 9th grade I got into swimming, and this allowed me to kind of control my body composition. Like I remember looking at photos of like my 9th grade year, and I looked better again. Like when I say better, I just mean healthier, more active, etc. But then 10th grade comes in, and in 10th grade I actually was in body composition, which I'm super grateful for. That's like weightlifting and etc. And that taught me a lot. So that gave me, I think, a leg up, pardon the pun, but that gave me a leg up later in life when I started learning, to go to the gym and stuff. But I was at a new school, and so I think that year it was, and I had a group of friends, and it was all about video games and the funny stuff that we would joke about on TV, and we were geeky, and it was just all about that. But then like 11th grade rolls in, and school got very intense. I remember, because I was in like the AP classes, I was in AVID, which was basically this program to like help you get into college and stuff. So I was being pushed really hard, which is great. I mean, I'm glad that I was. But I think during that year, I didn't have like an outlet, because like 11th grade, we didn't have any PE. And I was doing my trampoline stuff at home, but I was no longer out playing with the neighborhood kids. Those years were long past. So, and then I learned how to drive, and I started working at a fast food restaurant. I worked at Popeye's Chicken for 2 years, which is a whole other adventure. But because I was older and more aware, I had money. I had my own money that wasn't given to me by somebody. So it just became a constant adventure of just going out to eat. So I remember it was like Carl's Jr., Weston Bacon Cheeseburger, Wings and Things, which was like a wings place in where I grew up. Wings and breadsticks, smoothies, like sugary smoothies, not just like at home some fruit, non-fat or non-sugar, full fat Greek yogurt, protein powder, nuts, like the kind of smoothies I make now every day. I'm talking like the sugary juices with the strawberry juice, which is a high fructose corn syrup probably, blended, with some fruit, ice, and frozen yogurt that's full of sugar. So that's the kind of smoothies that we're getting. Let's be real. I mean, juice it up and all those Jamba Juice, it's just dessert in a cup, basically, with some vitamin C, etc. Cold Stone, I remember it was like Panda Express. That's when I discovered Panda Express, which is like, so this is fast food. But this was everywhere, every day. It was like how I spent my money. And oh my gosh, I was so financially bad. If I could go back in time, I would have gone into finance and like taught myself how to like save money and how to invest. It's like, but you can't go back in time. You just have to work towards the future. That's another story. So things got worse for a bit, having started to work at a fast food restaurant and having the ability to go spend my own money on food, because I think what I was doing now, and I guess what I'm trying to get to is there was a reason we're doing that, right? Like we do learn habits from when we're growing up, and that has to do with, I think, the culture that we're in, what we're taught is okay, oh, boys will be boys, you're gonna eat a lot, and so there's things that we're kind of not explicitly taught, but I think that we learned, that I learned in here just by being in society, that where I could justify things. And so going into adulthood, it leads to poor decisions. But I think that it became a crutch for emotional issues, and something that I'm not going to make this the topic of this video, but I mean, if you can't already tell, I know I'm not it's a little obvious, but some of you already know this if you've come here from other places online where I've kind of redirected you. You probably know that I am gay. So there were, that goes back to when I was like 12, 11, and kind of realized like, oh my gosh, like all these things that I'm supposed to, feel about girls, I feel, but I feel them for boys, like guys. And so again, that's not the topic of this video. I just wanted to say there was that issue. There was the prosthetic, like my amputation issue, and issues came up with that, especially starting in adolescence, feeling different, feeling not included. And I wasn't necessarily as social as I am now, which is so funny. I was not like that. I really disliked other kids. Well, I shouldn't say I disliked other kids. I disliked being around a lot of other kids. I mean, I liked learning. That was all I liked about school, was just the stuff I was learning. And I didn't like lunch. I didn't like recess. I had a few close friends that I just desperately clinged on, some of which I'm still close to today. But I just did not like, and kids are not great in how they interact with other people. So learning how to socialize is difficult. And of course, I don't know, I feel like when we're younger, from my experience, it was a lot easier to fall into the oh poor me territory. Unfortunately, a lot of adults still think that way, and I've noticed my own self in my own development as a person is taking more agency and more responsibility for everything in my life, because really I'm the only one that can do anything. But I digress yet again. I told you that would happen. But something changed in 2006. So yes, I had these things that were going on in my head, whether it was related to, understanding the feelings I was having, whether it was trying to understand who I was and what my abilities or troubles were, and trauma. We all have trauma. We all have personal trauma in our lives. I don't want to go into any specifics, but the point is, something changed in 2006. It was the end of high school. that was, and again, I don't want this to be about, any one particular topic, but it just happens that like when I came out, like, with my, let's just say romantic preferences, so to say, sexual romantic preferences, things did change at that time. And I think it was because I had bottled things up in that way. It gave me a sense of confidence. And, I have a great family, I had a great friend group. So I didn't have those issues. I'm going to talk more about that in a different video, like my quote unquote coming out story. But that's not the point here. I just want to say that happened to coincide. I know that having gone through that process absolutely contributed to my change in mindset about my like personal health and well-being. Absolutely. I don't know if it was the only thing that led to it, but it was a major contributing factor for me being more self-aware and wanting to change things for the better. So I made like these small changes, and so by now I was I was 17, so I had some maturity to me. Not a lot of maturity, but I had enough to be self-aware enough that I started making little changes. Like I remember specifically, I set a goal that I was going to quit eating chips and I was going to quit drinking soda and candy. So I remember as a kid, I was self-aware enough to be like, I'm going to cut out these snack foods. And it was amazing what that did in like a few weeks, because what ended up happening was I inadvertently also stopped going to all these fast food restaurants. I mean, mind you, I was still eating out. I still remember that was like a big part of my life. I mean, I still love to like go with my friends. We were 17 years old. We were driving. We felt independent. Most of us had part-time jobs, at least the people that I hung out with. All my friends were working teenagers. And we would go out, and that's how we would spend our time. We would go places. We would fool around at the park. We'd go out to eat, and we would still have these big dinners. It's just that I did these little changes that resulted in a big transformation over the course of a small amount of time. So I still have photos from like January 2006 and photos in April, May of that year. And I look like a different person, at least to my perspective. I looked very different. And I felt more confident. I felt better. I felt more alive. And of course, that shows in my face, I think. I had less kind of acne, on my face. I was more bright, and I felt a lot better. I also had to go through a big process of getting a new leg because I dramatically shrunk size, and I had to get a new fitting leg socket. That was, I think, in April of 2006, if I remember correctly. It was in March or April, because it was that quick that I had dropped. I have to estimate, I don't know this for sure because I don't have the numbers, I never measured, but I had to have dropped at least 30 or 40 pounds minimum to have gone through that kind of change. And so I went and got a new leg, but I continued to lose weight. So summer came along, and I kind of maintained those lifestyle changes, just a little lifestyle, not even major ones, just the ones that I mentioned, like not eating candy anymore. I was really just kind of going about life normally and kind of eating normally. And I started college later that year, and I learned right away, I was very awkward and inexperienced with life. I wasn't one of those kids that got involved with any substances, illicit substances, at all when I was in high school. And so that the culture shock, I think, at first kind of got to me, and I didn't really know quite how to handle it, and I made some immature decisions in my first year of college. But I totally started slowly drifting into neglecting anything related to my physical health. And I had, however, continued to drop weight, which is funny because I remember going to the student diner or whatever you call it, where you would swipe your meal card in the dorms, and it was just a night. They would call it the freshman 15, because it was just every kind of junk food you can imagine in one place, and a salad bar, And so we were in there, just infinite access to the frozen yogurt machine. We had, the waffle maker that there was a huge line for it. We had everything you can imagine in this university dining hall, and I wasted so many of my meal cards in a short amount of time there. And that led me, of course, to using what I should have been saving as my student loan money on food. Again, more financial irresponsible decisions that I'm still paying for to this day. That is another story. And then came like a major blow in my life. So December 2006 rolls around. And mind you, I had mentioned that I had gotten a new fitting leg socket in around April time of that year. So fast forward to December of that same year, I had still changed shape. I had still like lost mass. And so I was putting a lot of pressure in my prosthetic. So imagine that you start wearing a shoe that's too large. You know, you're gonna scrape against parts of it where it should be conforming to the whole volume of your anatomical part. In this case, where the part of my limb that I put my prosthetic leg into was no longer fitting, and so all my weight was being directly placed to the bottom. And somewhere in in this dirty college dorm life, I developed a staph infection, and it settled in the bottom of my leg. I don't remember or even know if the infection was caused from a cut, like an incision or something. I don't know if I cut myself or had a bruise, and then that's how the infection got in there, or if the infection was started another way. And I guess the best word I could use is settled in my leg. I don't know, but I just started getting this swelling just at the end of my leg. So just real quick, just to show you what I'm talking about, like down here. So this right here at the bottom of my leg started getting swollen. And I was like, why does that feel weird? And it was like tender to the touch, but it didn't quite hurt yet, until just one night I remember falling asleep and I had like a fever. And I mean, I was panicking. I didn't know what was happening. I couldn't wear my leg. I like called my family. They drove all the way up. You know, I was 8 hours away from home. And so they drove up to where I was in my dorm, and we had to drive back. And this is right before the holiday, like right before Christmas. So I went and got it like drained in the emergency room. So like the emergency room like drained infection out of my leg. And then they like just kind of wrapped it up, and I spent Christmas that way. And then the infection came back worse. Like it came back, and I got admitted to the hospital afterward. And I spent about a week there, I believe, because I think I spent about 5 or 6 days in the hospital. And they had to do full-on surgery. Like they had to like cut an incision in my leg. They were afraid that if it got to the bone that I could lose more limb, which was like terrifying and traumatizing. But luckily it was fine. I had all the infection drained out. I was being pumped with antibiotics, and I had what's called a PICC line put in, where they put basically like a wire in like your arm, or up your vein, and they basically feed it all the way in, and it feeds antibiotics into your system over the course of a few weeks. They told me not to look, but they had me, so medicated in the hospital, and so, and I looked, and it was like a murder scene. That vision will never leave my mind, of them putting that PICC line in my arm. Yeah, it was bad. The worst thing you can imagine, just imagine it. That's what it was like. Sorry about that. And that I was very depressed during that time. It felt like the end of the world. It really did, which is so funny because we all go through medical traumas and issues, but I feel like going through something like that as an adult, while it would be very, very stressful, I think I would have a lot more self-awareness and understanding of how things work now to get through that in a more healthy manner. But I think for me, it ended up making things better for me in the long run, but in the short term, it made it way worse. So all my motivations were very superficial and immature. So my things I was worried about was not being able to like party with my friends. I was mad that I, it was more about how it looked, that it looked like I had a scar and it was ugly, and that's what depressed me. And I wanted to be out partying. It wasn't anything important. It was superficial, young. I felt like I was entitled to this first year college lifestyle that really was not healthy or productive in any way, shape, or form. And that led to some poor decisions. And so I did get a new leg, a fit after that, of course. I don't remember how quickly that happened, because I know I was on crutches for a while. But it happened before I went back to school, like back to start second semester of university, and I definitely pushed myself a little hard. I'm really lucky that I didn't like redevelop an infection, because I was like motivated. I wanted to walk, but again, it wasn't to improve my health. It was because I wanted to act like it never happened. So I'm back in dorms, and I just started hanging out with the wrong people. Not necessarily at college. I actually met some of the best people in my life, like future roommates, that I would have like the next year. Amazing people in my life. I'm talking about like some people more so in my hometown that maybe weren't the best influence to hang out with at the time, who were into certain illicit substances, and who, maybe didn't have the kinds of ambitions or the interest in watching you become your best self. People that want to, that do illegal things and aren't necessarily motivators for you to be better. Those are the kind of people I'm talking about. And I made some decisions that weren't good. I wasn't focusing on school. I was focusing on socializing and getting the attention of these people that were not optimal to my well-being. And where do I want to go from there? But when I went back to college, so I finished off that year, and then I came back home. And this is kind of what I guess here's the missing link here, what I was trying to, let me re-summarize what I was just saying. So I went back to second semester of my first year of college. I kind of like did that year, kind of got into the whole party scene at college. And then because I kind of got into that party scene and kind of got like too cool for school in a way, that I thought like, hey, I beat this thing, I can like go party now. I then came back home for the summer. So back in my hometown, I even worked at the same fast food restaurant that I had worked at through high school, just for some extra money. And it was during that summer that I really got involved with these bad influences that I'm talking about. And then comes the beginning of the next year, and like things started getting a little bit better. And so in 2007, in the fall, I moved in with these two awesome ladies in San Francisco. We found an apartment, and that was like where things kind of like got a little bit better for me. I mean, there were still, as I'll say in a moment, internal issues I was dealing with for sure. But we're in the city, and the dorm life was kind of behind me, and so all the traumas that came with that and all of the pettiness was gone, and it was just me and these two roommates, and it felt like I was truly living like this kind of peace, love, city life for a while. And I got a little bit more serious with school at that time. I still kind of had these cycles of lack of focus and lack of motivation and drive in a specific direction, but I got into biking again. I mean, I bought a new bike with my student loan money, which was not smart. But I'm glad I did. It was something that I'm glad that I did at the time, because I paid it off eventually. And I got like super into food. I mean, I started going to Trader Joe's. I just discovered like this amazing magical land called Trader Joe's. And I would ride home with my, my two bags. And I just felt confident for the first time. I mean, I changed the way that I was dressing, for the better. And I just felt more energized, I actually saw myself, and I started looking in the mirror and liking what I saw, and I was noticing, of course I was 18, and so I was noticing the looks, from people. And it's the city, so there was like a lot of gay dudes around. So like I was starting to get like looks, and I was like, oh, I'm not used to being looked at, in that way. And so that was a weird thing. But again, that's a different conversation. I need to get back on topic. But I felt good. This was about health. And so being out of the dorms was really helpful, but here is what ended up happening. So because I started changing physically and I started liking what I saw in the mirror, and I felt like a different person. And that combined with starting getting into like the healthy eating, quote unquote, and there's no point in me just going into the details and the weeds and what I mean by that, but just whatever you understand. I was like, I was cooking my own meals for the first time. When I was going out to eat, it was no longer going out to get burgers and fries. I was going out to get Thai food, or, I was trying out, new let's just say cuisines that I had not been exposed to when I was young. It wasn't about like, let's all get fast food. I was genuinely, I felt more cultured, so to say, than I had been when I grew up. And when I was going shopping, I was buying, I was being conscious of what I was doing. I was making sure I didn't have like sugar loaded stuff in my diet. I was getting vegetables. Like I was buying and cooking whole vegetables and eggs, and I was making chicken and making, even like tofu and stuff, like stuff that I had never eaten before. I was eating hummus. I was discovered all these foods that became staples that had not been a part of me, and I loved it. I loved the way it made me feel, and everything was good. But that came with some weird issues, because then I started getting overly obsessed with like the way I looked, and I started noticing flaws that probably weren't there. But I was also starting to exercise. I found a local gym that was ridiculously expensive in the city. But nonetheless, I started learning to work out. I was using those skills that I learned in body comp several years prior in 10th grade of high school. I was suddenly honing those skills, and I was looking up, online how to do bench press, how to do, everything. And I was starting to like the way I looked a little bit more. So then came and this is where I'm going to start to get into some topics that I'm not a professional. And so, if anything related to like disordered eating, is something that you've experienced or that you are experiencing, don't take anything I'm saying as like sound medical advice or anything. It's just my experience. But I started using food as like a comfort. Like it became like a late night binging session. I'm just going to be flat out honest. Like it became a binging thing. And I would go through these guilt cycles, of like, being all good all day. And then I don't remember exactly, but I probably was restricting is probably what was happening. Is I was probably being like overly restrictive in what I was eating in the daytime. And then night would come and I would get like the nighttime worry or like the stress. I've always had sleep issues, which is another issue. And I would cope with the food. And I would feel guilty about it. And one night, I just remember one night, I did that. And I remember what I was eating too. It was like I was eating naan bread from Trader Joe's and hummus, which is like, seems pretty innocent as like a food to eat, but it's very carby. Obviously, when you eat tons of bread, you just feel like in one sitting. And I had gone through like half a bag of this naan bread and toasting it and then eating it with the hummus and then toasting it and eating it with the hummus. It was just so much food. And I remember feeling sick. And I don't know what prompted me to do it, but I went to the bathroom and let's just, without using all the terminology, I relieved it out of me. And obviously that's disordered eating. And I didn't realize that at the time. And that started. And it was just like this bizarre cycle. And then it continued kind of to become a bigger part of my life, And then it kind of went in and out. It's not like I did that every day. It wasn't, luckily for me, something that I did every day. It's something that would come up maybe once or twice a week, which is still not good. It was a problem. It was enough to be a problem. But it related to like body image, and I definitely didn't see I started looking at myself more poorly, which was really strange because in that past year, I had been doing so much better than I had, previously in the past. And the issues I think with my prosthetic leg were really big at this time, like self-image wise and trying to understand how I fit in. I truly didn't feel like I was normal. And at this time, that was the biggest problem, was my self-image as like an amputee. It took me forever after that point to like realize that I was worthy, that when other people would like look at me or even like give me like suggestive like looks, or it just made me freak out because I felt like, yeah, but I'm not normal, so I would do things to like try to hide it or I would purposefully miss out on experiences because I felt like I didn't have a normal body, is what I felt like. And I think that contributed to the disordered eating and using the food as comfort and then purging it. So weird. I've never talked about this except for like with like friends. I continued to do poorly in school at that time. Like I just wasn't focused. And I've always been a great student. Like I've always loved learning. And around this time, I just was so lost and detached. I had no interest. I had no plan. People need a plan, you know? I mean, something that I notice, whenever I notice that there's something lacking in my life, it's because I realize I don't have a goal. I don't have a plan. And then the second I start making a goal and I work towards it, I feel a lot more fulfilled and happy. And this was kind of pre me realizing that. So again, I'm trying to keep this very general. It's hard not to focus on topics, but I did eventually move back in with family. So after that year, it was 2008 by then, my two roommates had both moved from the city and they had gone elsewhere. And so I was in this position of either having to find new roommates, and I knew that I needed to find direction. I mean, at this point I had 2 years of college under my belt and like nothing to really show for it. Like I had courses completed, but there was no direction. I mean, I had no major that I remember. That I think I was undeclared even up to that point. And I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And it was really stressing me out. and money-wise, I was missing family, I was missing friends, I was homesick for the first time. And I just kind of came to this realization that I needed to move back home. But what ended up happening first is I moved in with some relatives that were a little bit closer, but not fully home. And things were good for a few months, actually. The thing is, though, I remember it was during that time that instead of doing the whole purging, binging purging thing, I thought, well, what if I just restrict like certain things? What if I just eat good things? You know, I was looking at bad information online. I was probably looking at extremist, type non-scientific things that were giving me messages. So first it was, animal products are bad. And then so I cut out all animal. So meat, I should say. I was suddenly a vegetarian, but there was no rhyme or reason why I chose that. It was just arbitrary. It was just like, I'm gonna be a vegetarian, that's healthier. It wasn't for animal rights reasons or anything. And then it turns to, oh, I need to be vegan because this. And so it was the veganism. That was the answer, and again, it's just bad. And not that I'm judging. If somebody is healthy and makes that decision for themselves in a very, and this is not about anyone else except me. This is just me, and like the reasons I made a decision were not founded, or they were not based in good reason. And I just remember getting involved with like bad forums online. Like I was involved with like a raw food forum, and like looking back now, I go, it was just like an echo chamber of people who just believed that cooking made food bad, and so unscientific and just dogmatic, unreasonable kind of stuff, and those kind of things. So I'm hearing all these conflicting messages, and it made me very confused with how I was doing. Ironically, I still started getting like in better shape, and I think the reason is because even though I was doing these weird patterns with like food and with eating, I was still getting a lot of vegetables. I was eating a lot of protein, and so I was drinking a lot of water. So funny enough, even though I had a lot to deconstruct in the future, I still, in general, I was working out. So I was kind of going in the right direction. I just was making a lot of bad, unhealthy detours along the way. I started working at a natural food store in 2010, which was kind of fun because this is by the time I had moved back home and I had transferred to a different university, and I finally was like focused on school more. But I wanted to work part-time. And so I don't know if working at that food store really was good for my mental well-being at that time, because there were a lot of other individuals there that were kind of going through the same weird food patterns that I was, that, as it can be in the natural food kind of realm, people can have very good intentions and have very good perspectives, but people can also get kind of extreme, like kind of extremist kind of type mentality where it's like all or nothing. So finding a balance is difficult, especially, when it comes to this all getting tied in with like personal experiences and emotions and stuff. But I wasn't eating fast food or anything. 2011, things got very interesting. Like something changed, and I started like doing things methodically and like more reasonably. I was like totally focused on my education. I was finishing up college. I had a direction. I was no longer like obsessing over food categories. I gave up the whole like a vegan, vegetarian, because I realized I had no good reason to do that. I started getting more conscious about like not drinking like a lot of alcohol, which I'm really glad that I did. I still did, but not in like extreme amounts. Excuse me. And in 2012, I went into education. So I was a teacher for 7 years. I don't know if I mentioned that in one of my other videos. I do something totally different now, but life became less about like food obsessions and it became like purposeful. Like I had like a purpose. And 2013 was like the slow beginning into this normalcy. Like I feel like things kind of became just normal for me. And when I say normal, like I still cared about, eating well and cooking good food, but I still indulged on things that I wanted in a much healthier way. And I took working out very seriously. I was working all the time, in education. And those of you that know that field, I mean, it takes everything from you. So that kind of like 2013 to 2020 were more or less like a lot of the same. It was just me out as like a single independent person, just living on my own, working, figuring things out, exercising, continuing my swimming. Over those years, I became like a much better swimmer. I got like really good at that, even more than I was before, like really disciplined in my swimming. I became much better at working out. I still think though that the point that I'm getting to is I think I've been undoing, even since then to this day, I'm undoing a lot of years of bad habits. Like I think that between my years of like when I was 17, like that end of high school era, up until my early 20s, like when I started teaching, like 24, like 17 to 24, that big chunk of my life, I think I was going through so many food cycles that I probably was deficient in different nutrients like over different periods of that time. I was a lot more hyper-focused on superficial things and not my health overall, even though I came out of that whole experience way stronger, like and way smarter and way more reasonable in the long run, because I went through a lot of these things and, getting help for some of the things that I had gone through. Luckily I got over the occasional binging, purging behaviors. Like that's been long gone for many years now. And a new era started in 2020, as it did for I think many of us. I switched careers during that time. Now, it's funny because during 2020, a lot of people were talking about how it really affected their mental health in terms of like, being in all day and not exercising. I feel like for me, it was kind of the opposite, and I'm very fortunate for that. I was still working at home, obviously, and even in my new career, working at home. And it gave me more time to like reassess my values and what I'm interested in. And I actually am very happy with my life now. And post-COVID, I feel even better than I did 2018, 2019 era. I just feel very good. I mean, I've matured a lot. I really don't indulge the way I used to. I cook almost all my own foods. I've gone through cycles. Like I've moved to different cities, and sometimes when I move, I kind of get into like the nightlife of the area. And so that leads to like more eating out. But generally speaking, like the last, at least even the past several months, I mean, everything is just very balanced, I feel, in terms of what I do and how often I do it. My life is just basically like cooking food, whole foods, just making everything from scratch for the most part. Simple still. I don't do like complex, no Gordon Ramsay things, but I'm very focused on like nutritious, wholesome, lots of very good, high protein foods and lots of vegetables, lots of fruits, I do eat a lot of meat, but I feel like that's just really good. I do really well with eating meat. I just do. It's just the way it is. And the biggest thing that I do want to talk about in another video, I have recently decided to completely cut out alcohol from my life. I've gone through these periods of sobriety of when I like we're all cut out dry. Let's just say I'll go dry for like several months at a time. And I always feel really good doing it. And I always feel like this weird sense of obligation. Like, well, I might miss out if I don't have a drink with dinner, or buy the pack of craft beer. I know, don't insult me. Like, buy the craft beer or buy the fancy wine. You know, I've always felt like alcohol does such a good job at drawing us in with what it promises, and with the aesthetic, and with, you know, the nightly cocktail and going out to the bar and socializing, that it kind of clouds whether the alcohol actually does anything for me. And me personally, I'm very fortunate that I've never been somebody who cannot put it down. I've known people that really struggle with that. For me, it always felt like that old friend that you feel obligated to hang out with. That's my relationship with alcohol. That, well, if I'm going out to that place, I mean, I have to bring this one along. I gotta bring little Miss Whiskey along with me, you know, because she promises it's gonna be a great time, but really she just makes my stomach hurt a little bit. And that's not to say that I really dislike alcohol. I mean, I think most of us like a good buzz, but I had to come to this realization that there's a reason I keep going back to these periods of like dryness, of like just not having any, not even a drop, because the way I look at things, it's the same way that I used to look at sugary things that I would go to when I was lonely, or highly fried fast food. It was like my best friend, that toxic best friend who is not good for you, who's not a good influence, but is going to comfort you in the moment. They don't want to see you do better, but they want to comfort you in the moment. That's the relationship I had with alcohol, even though I wasn't a huge drinker. It just was like, hey, you're stressed out. Like, I've got the cure. Like, come over here. Well, I don't need it. Yeah, you do. You know, you're at the bar. Like, you need to have that. It's going to make it better. And I've kind of come to this realization that I don't need that. I love going out to bars. I love going out to socialize, to restaurants. And I've just realized in these dry spells that I'm just as happy when I don't drink alcohol. And I feel better. I feel better overall. So I'm going to cut talking about that now, because I do want to do my own video on that. Other things that I do nowadays, I mean, I virtually eat no added sugar. Virtually, I mean, that's not to say I'll never have things that are sweet. That's ridiculous. I mean, I eat anything with natural sugars in it, like fruits and stuff. But I'm not dogmatic about it. But I don't add sugar to anything. If I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna buy like a drink, I never buy like a drink with sugar added. I'll always get like the sugar-free alternative to it. I don't eat sweets. I just don't crave it. I mean, you know, on special occasions, I might eat like a piece of cake at the family event if it's like everyone's eating it. I might do that, I might not. It just depends on my mood, but I don't have that dogmatic, you know, obsession over it. If I don't want it, I don't want it. And I don't crave it when I don't have it. You know, I stay away from the processed snacks. I just try to, when I get like the craving, you know, I just want to eat everything in sight, I just focus on, you know, high protein foods, like wholesome high protein foods. So I'm gonna, you know, I'll eat chicken breast or even chicken thighs, and I'll cook those with like some brown rice or quinoa, and I'll make some great seasoning sauce. You know, I'll make a lot of nice roasted veggies, just wholesome, good food, you know, that fills you up, you feel good, you feel nourished. And then if I'm still craving something sweet, like I want something down, oh, heck, I'll get the unsweetened whole milk yogurt. And today it was like a bunch of, you know, just a bunch of full fat, no sugar yogurt. It's a big old scoop of it with pomegranate, like a whole pomegranate. Just poured all the seeds in there, just mix it all together. It's just the best combo. It's tart, it's not super sweet because there's no sugar in the yogurt. And it's just so yummy. I mean, it's just great. You know, things like that. And then you feel good. I feel good about it. I do still struggle with body issues, but it's like a normal amount, so to say. I feel like it's just enough. And I feel good for my age. I'm almost 35. I feel better than I really ever have, but not necessarily just physically, but just mentally as a person. And I've still got a lot of work to do. Everyone does. But I think the biggest part of my life now is just acknowledging all of these experiences and taking accountability and responsibility for myself and my actions, and to be able to constantly go through these cycles of reflection, reevaluation, and then reinvention of myself is what I'm trying to do. And I'm definitely trying to start a new cycle in my life at some point soon. It doesn't just relate to what I've been discussing today, but just every other aspect of my life. I want to always have something to improve. So that being said, I don't know how good of a job I did there being focused or even making sense, but I'm really glad I did this because I feel like this is more for me than it is for anybody else. But if you're somebody who happened to even listen to this, yet alone the whole thing, thank you. And let me know what you think. And I just got to give that one more disclaimer. This is just me talking to the camera. I'm not promoting anything. I don't have any agenda as far as what people should or shouldn't do. Talk to experts, talk to professionals. Thank you for coming to my not so TED Talk. This was Mikey. You all are great. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.